The New York Football Giants and Joe Schoen make another offseason move, this time sending a seventh-round pick to the Arizona Cardinals in exchange for former top 10 eighth overall pick Isaiah Simmons. We break down what he means for the New York Football Giants and the Wink Martindale defense, how we think he can best be utilized, and if this is a needle mover for the defensive side of the ball for Big Blue in the upcoming season. Yes, sir. It's OGP, the One Giant Podcast, where, of course, I am one of your hosts, Adam Armbrecht, covering the Brooklyn Nets on the Locked On Nets podcast, and also your New Jersey Devils on the Devils Puck Luck podcast. And I am flying solo for this bit of an emergency update. You don't expect necessarily moves like this to come just ahead of the final preseason game. We just did yesterday some of our coverage around last 2 days, really, actually 2 episodes, talking about the New York Football Giants, the 53-man roster, who's making it, who's not making it, and then looking for some of the potential cuts that could come down the road around the league and improving this team at a number of different positions. A chief among them was offensive line. We also discussed linebacker as being a potential spot that they wanted to target, and then the depth in the secondary and what they could possibly do to make that a better or at least deeper position. Enter Isaiah Simmons, right? So first, just on the surface, why was the move able to be made here for the New York Football Giants and Joe Schoen? Fifth-year option was not picked up by the Cardinals on Isaiah Simmons. That's going back to, I think, last month when that became a factor there. And it would have been a substantial amount of money. I think north of $12 million when you're talking about a player that was taken 8th overall when he came out in the 2020 draft. So the Cardinals, who have had turnovers, obviously, in their roster, turnovers in their coaching staff, have gotten to a place now where really the money association is the big issue here. Because, as we'll talk about, for a player that never really has reached the full potential that maybe the expectations were when he came out, hard to commit that kind of money, especially when for that franchise, it's hard to say which direction that they're going to be going here over the next couple of seasons. So, because you don't pick up the 5th-year option, he's entering his 4th year. He's going to be a free agent. There doesn't look like there's an intention to retain him. That's where Joe Schoen enters. 7th-round pick to take a flyer on a former first-round top 10 talent is certainly something that you love to see the Giants do here. And there's a number of reasons why. But if we break it down from a couple of different angles here, first and foremost, as a lot of outlets are obviously covering this over the last couple of hours, Josh Edwards over on CBS Sports had the quote, though, which I always find fun, when Jonathan Gannon, first-year head coach, obviously looked to move on from this defender. But just a few weeks ago, when he first came into the building, at least, I told him I didn't want to play. This is Isaiah Simmons. I didn't want to play linebacker. I felt more comfortable getting back to the things that I've done in the past, he said via the team's website. But then this is what you had here. Just days ago, the coach claimed that he liked what he had seen from the Nebraska native. He's been reliable back there, which is the first trait of a safety to me, Gannon said. He's the right spot at the right time. He shows range and some hitting ability, a little bit of coverage ability, downhill striking ability, long way to go, but I like where he is at. Cut to, he's been traded. So, and again, this is why this is a weapon that coming out of college. I went back and watched the NFL Network tape when they were discussing this draft pick in the top 10 there. First and foremost, reminder, graded out as a 7.03. That's a Pro Bowl level talent coming out of Clemson, 6'4", 238, has the 33-inch reach, obviously has all of the measurables, production score, in college, athleticism score, 99th percentile in both of those categories, sporting a 4.39 40 speed. Obviously, the measurables were always there. But then he gets into the league, and at the time, Cliff Kingsbury said for the Cardinals, we're going to go ahead and identify him as an inside linebacker. We're going to plug him in there, and that's how we're going to use him. So, and even then, a lot of the coverage was interesting for a guy that has been used in some different roles at the college level to go ahead and say you're going to specifically isolate him into one role is an interesting choice. Cut to, over his time in the NFL, they started slowly branching him out, right? Moving into safety, getting him out into nickel. So all of these different things started to say, well, we tried to put him into a single box when the traits say you got to be able to move this player around a little bit and accentuate what he does best. Now, in addition to that, there's a couple other notes here that were also good coming out of that conversation. So personally, this is going back to Simmons, and this is going back to, I think, earlier in the summer here. Personally, I go about every year like it's a contract year, and this is following not having the fifth-year option picked up. I just couldn't imagine someone going out there and not having the best season they could possibly have, regardless of whether or not I get paid after this year or whatever. I'm going to do the best that I can. Now, here's some of the notable things, as we're going to obviously turn our attention to what it means for the Giants. Look at the depth chart. Where does he fit in? What are the key packages we'd like to see him get used in? Now, Simmons' career coverage numbers are, when targeted, 73% completion percentage for opposing QBs with 9 touchdowns on 182 attempts. Those quarterbacks have an 82.8 passer rating against Simmons, but he has also played, obviously, at a number of different spots here. Notable quote, "I'd like to master defensive back first before I dive into playing with outside linebacker," Simmons said, or whatever else might come about. So what I'll find fascinating is the way that the Giants are identifying and looking to use him. Obviously, those completion percentages, that's something you're going to pay attention to when you're looking at bringing in a player like this and what it's going to mean, and just why a top 10 talent has found himself in a spot where the fifth-year option was something that a team didn't want to do, where some of the coverage grades have not bore themselves out necessarily as successfully as you might want. Simmons lined up in the slot 45.6 of the defensive snaps the past season. He played down in the box the majority of his other remaining snaps, but the Clemson product saw snaps at free safety, cornerback as well. And this is Giants Simmons coordinator mentioning Wink Martindale has always executed a high rate of man coverage, so Simmons' athleticism could go to good use. Additionally, just out of that CBS one, we talk about grading it out from a Giants perspective, and I agree with this and might even go even higher based on what the price point was when we're talking about just a 7th-round pick to take a 1-year flyer on a guy. Over on CBS, the trade does not move the needle in either direction very much. Talking from a Giants perspective, he's an intriguing fit for Martindale's defensive goals, but has proven little to this point in his career. His skill set allows New York to match different personnel groups. That's what we're going to talk about primarily, getting into those nickel packages, talking about maybe opposing tight ends because he has speed and he has size. That's something that you couldn't really look at the roster right now and say, who would you sick on the Greg Kittles of the world, right? We talk about training camp and Darren Waller and being a nightmare for the defense right now over the course of the summer. I think that that's something we might look at, even though, again, the coverage grades have not been spectacular. From the Cardinals side, the determined Simmons was not a fit for them, and it's what they wanted to do and what they wanted to do on defense, then getting anything in return for him is a positive. However, it's impossible to shake the skunk cost of a first-round pick. The return on investment is rather low. Listen, and for me, just on that front, we talk about this from a Giants perspective. You cannot, and thank you for everybody if you're in on the live stream. We will turn our attention over to the comments room here before we dive into the Giants side of things. But we said this from a Giants perspective. You never want to be throwing good money after bad. So if you don't think the player is a fit, if you've had a turnover in coaching staff, at some point you have to stop talking about he was a first-round pick, he was taken 8th overall. Does he fit our scheme? Do we see the value? Are we interested in paying this money, right? You're not beholden to what once was. You're looking at how you can improve going forward. So I'm not entirely shocked by the fact, with that big number associated on the 5th-year option, that the Cardinals look to move on from him. Then we turn our attention over to the Giants side of it. But first, a shout out to Ryan, Joseph, and Jason getting in on the conversation over there. Ryan was first and foremost, love this move for Big Blue. If we can maximize this guy's athleticism, it's going to be Wink, if anyone can. Yeah, and that's exactly what we're going to talk about, just how we can plug him in, how we can take maybe a marginal amount of snaps, right, but maximize what the output is, maximize the value. And it really does talk about the areas that the Giants currently still lack on this roster. As excited as we are and the improvements that have been made, there are areas that they need to get better. Jason chiming in there with, I expect a lot of big nickel packages. I expected a lot of big nickel packages even before we picked up Simmons, right? So, and we talked about this on our last episode, looking at the defensive side. How are the fronts going to line up? Could they be running a little bit of the 3-3-5 where you're going to have just 3 down linemen, then linebackers where it's Okereke, the lone man there. Maybe you're going to have Thibodeau standing up and then adding in another linebacker. There's a world where when you get into the secondary and you talk about coverage usage, yes, you can go ahead and take a look at applying him there, but you can also think about him, even though we talk about those quotes, don't want to be playing at linebacker before I've mastered coverage. At some point, you are just looking also to maximize the value of reps. So I think there is still versatility and usage here that we'll get into in a second. Last but not least, I want to make sure that I just give everybody a little bit of the shout out, and that is going to be oh, well, that's Ryan saying thanks for the shout out. Well, you got it, buddy. That's no problem at all. Bring on the 3 safety set: McKinney, Pinnock, and Simmons. So this is the other area that we can talk about. So let's turn our attention to the Giants, to how Isaiah Simmons can be looked at, and let's also talk about some grade outs here. We always say this. Listen, is PFF the end all be all? No. However, is it a metric by which you can judge things to go along with watching a guy on tape, to going along with how, what his tackle percentages are, miss percentages, etc. When you go back to 2020, the first year when they tried to put him into where you're going to be a linebacker for us, 59.9 PFF grade, 39 solo tackles, a pick, 28 targets, and 28 receptions allowed. Fast forward to 2021, a even worse PFF grade. Now they're starting to get into, where are we moving you around? What are we going to do with you? A little bit more in that regard. 51, 81 solo tackles, 51 receptions on 71 targets. Now, fast forward to this past season, a 67.9 PFF grade, 70 solo tackles, now 62 receptions on 74 targets, right? Had 2 picks in there as well. He is a raw athletic player. And at some point, and we talk about that percentage, 45% playing in coverage, and then the rest of it essentially being down in and around the box. I think at some point, I always say this about prospects coming out of college as well, and this is true. We always think about it with quarterbacks, right? Sometimes, and Daniel Jones is the prime example right now, you get drafted by a regime that's having a hard time, an organization that's struggling to figure out where they want to go. Then you slowly turn things over. You get your new GM, you get your new head coach, you get your new offensive coordinator, and then you start to see what maybe you thought was possible going back to when you drafted Daniel Jones. Likewise, if we're getting excited about this, it's because we believe that Wink Martindale, that the Giants coaching staff are going to unlock the highest possible potential of Isaiah Simmons. So let's then examine it from one more level. And that's going to be on the Giants side of it when we take a look at where the Giants stand on their roster. We went just yesterday and looked at where we thought things were going to be for the New York Football Giants from a depth perspective, the 53-man roster, all those good things. Now, inside, let's go as far back in the defense and then work our way forward. We talk about the safety room. So the guys that we know are going to be locked in there, Xavier McKinney, Pinnock has had a really nice camp for himself. And then you look at, as right now, if you're on ESPN and you want to go that route, Isaiah Simmons is plugged in as the next man up behind Pinnock. Now, the other guy listed there would, of course, be Dane Belton. Have they seen enough from him in camp? Do they want him allowed to continue, to progress? Again, this is why we look at it at all 3 levels, because I think his presence, Isaiah Simmons, that is, does not mitigate the other usage of other players, because Simmons has had hits and misses, ups and downs, and is still a player that needs to refine his game, that needs to improve his game. So when you put him into that safety room, yes, that's exciting. The question maybe becomes a guy like Gervarius Owens, who we said, let's put him into the 53-man roster because he's performed well. Maybe he's a guy that gets thrown out of the practice squad if we're just talking about a numbers game. So potential impact there. Nobody else inside of the safety room were we really talking about after Dane Belton as being a lock to make the roster. Now you at least say you're going to have to make potentially a little bit of room here. Cycle it down now into the cornerback room, and we'll touch back in on the comments as well here as I'm flipping through screens. Touch back in now to the cornerback room. And this is where nickel packages especially, but we know, remember, we're now taking Adoree Jackson. We're going to move him into the slot. We're going to put Trey Hawkins and Deonte Banks on the outside. Okay, those are our top 3. We want Cordell Flott to continue to take that growth step forward and show that he's prepared to be a solid and consistent depth piece. After that, we believe that Darnay Holmes is on his way out, right? We believe that Aaron Robinson can't stay healthy, so it's hard to look at him as a viable option in these moments. There were not a lot of other players outside of Aruawari, who is a veteran, came in here to give that stability. There's not a lot of other guys that you were pointing to when you looked in that secondary. So if you're thinking about him in coverage use in certain packages, there you go. He adds another weapon into that group. And then we go right down into the linebacker room as well. I'll take a brief pause and check in on some of the comments before We just talk about the fact that I understand what he wants to be and what he wants to focus on. And I think the Giants make that trade with full awareness of where he wants to be and what he wants to work on. But you also just have to think about getting your best players on the field, getting your athleticism on the field. And he represents that. And I'm going to hone in on that here in just 1 second. But if we just take a look back over into the comments, Alex, welcome into the conversation. Do you know what his cap hit is going to be? And who is this most likely bump off the $50 million roster? Yeah, so the fifth-year option was going to be $12.7 million if they had picked it up. Currently, I'll pull it up now in the background here. If we look at Isaiah Simmons' contract, I would assume based on when the trade is occurring, that we're going to be, I'll take a look at if I can get the clear indication about what money locked in versus what money is going to be held over by the Cardinals, et cetera, right? So coming into this season, 2023, got a cap hit of $6.5 million. Now I need to look as far as the total guaranteed. Oh, yearly cash, excuse me, is 3.47. And then you've got bonus breakdowns were signing bonus was 3.1, 2.4 on the roster bonus. So I'll have to get a little bit of clarity. And maybe if somebody in the conversation here, because got this schedule, jumped in and wanted to make sure that we had that conversation rolling. Don't know, at least at this moment, how much money will carry over to the New York Football Giants. I'm just doing a quick scan here, 2025 as well. Here we go. So traded post June 1, which is what we have here. So the dead money is going to be 3.147 for the Arizona Cardinals. The cap savings is 3.427. So all that money is not going to carry over to the New York Football Giants. Now, I won't say it's 1-to-1, but maybe it's closer to the 3.4 than it is to the 6.5. We'll clarify that and bring that information to you as we get it knocked down. But that's also going to be a massive benefit, right? The New York Football Giants, who are operating still with an eye on the cap. They're not just able to spend freely here, excuse me. And this is why when you go back into the roster, look at a guy like Darnay Holmes, who Andy pointed out, north of $2 million in cap relief in cutting him in this offseason. So that is going to help offset bringing in a player like Simmons and that little bit of cap bump. And that's also separate about Darnay Holmes. Where is he in the pecking order? The other guy we mentioned on the other side of the football offensively was Matt Breida, who also comes with a decent amount of cap relief for the New York Football Giants as well. And all these things, I do think, become interesting for the Giants when you need to balance the books here. So if we just go in and talk about that very quickly here, just so we have a sense of offsetting some of those numbers and where we're going to stand. So as I said, Darnay Holmes, you're talking about in the cut. Let's go again and get him in the cut post June 1 category. Darnay Holmes is going to bring you in $2.7 million in cap relief if cut on post June 1. And that's where we are now. So that money right there. We also talk about Matt Breida and how that can help free up some money for this roster as well. So there's a couple of different areas that the Giants can just offset this move while taking a flyer on a guy. Before we go back into it a little bit more here, hitting up who else is in on the conversation? Ron Ryan. Sorry, RRF. They bash Simmons instead of holding the coaching staff accountable. Yeah, and we, again, this is what we talk about all the time, the development or lack of development from players. I mentioned this about to whatever level you thought he could be successful or you liked what he was, possibly able to do. Lorenzo Carter was always a guy that I thought, boy, if we had a better coaching staff, he may have developed better in the early portion of his career, and it wouldn't have been as likely that you move on from him. Ian in on the conversation as well. Adam, could he fit the role Jalen Smith played on passing downs as outside linebacker, big nickel? Yeah, and this is, so let's turn it back over and we'll dive right back in on the conversation just in the chat here. Thank you for joining everybody in on a Thursday midday live. This is where, if we're talking about usage and we go back and look at the Giants roster, again, early in his career, they try to put him in as inside linebacker, and it doesn't go well because they're looking at the freakish athleticism. But if you're going to look at the edge rusher, outside linebacker room, as well as the linebacker room, right? We know we have Kayvon Thibodeau, we know we have Bobby Okereke, and we know that we have Azeez Ojulari. I'm leaving out who you pair next to Okereke because You have Darian Beavers still coming off the injury. I'm high on him, but we don't know where he's at right now. Wink Martindale talked highly of Micah McFadden. We're excited about that in year number 2. But again, you don't look at either one of those players and at least say, oh, we have the guy that's consistent number 2 next to Bobby, nothing to worry about. And when you go in behind them, as we mentioned in our defensive side of the ball breakdown, Carter Coughlin is being talked about as having a nice camp, but he was a guy that was relegated to special teams and didn't see a lot of reps as his career progressed here. And he's a later round pick. Cam Brown, with the injury, he has not been productive defensively, had special teams value. He could be a cut candidate right now. There are not a lot of other guys inside of that room. And then when you look to the outside, we know we have Ward back out there. We've talked about Ximenez and his role. Timon Fox has certainly played well for the New York Football Giants. But going behind Ward, right? That's when you get into the Bowers. That's when you get into the Deontay Johnsons, who we listed as a potential cut candidate as well. And this is why putting him up there on those, as you mentioned, thinking about using him the way Jalen Smith was, and Jalen Smith was sometimes successful, sometimes not. Isaiah Simmons is a far better athlete, far better natural athlete than Jalen Smith was. So yes, putting him out there and standing him up and using him in a versatile way, where is he lining up there at the nickel and coming down in on a blitz? Is he lining up in a traditional outside linebacker stand-up role and then dropping back into zone coverage? At some point, from a Giants perspective, especially when you want to go into those big secondary packages, what you really need to have is speed and athleticism to be versatile and where the matchups come up here. And that's what I think Isaiah Simmons represents, an upgrade in athleticism, in speed, in size, and in strength. Now, does that mean that he still has a ton to prove? Of course it does, right? But look at the rest of the roster and look at the depth chart. Everybody, you'd sit here and say, has a lot to prove across the board, right? And just as a reminder, going back to 2020 when he came in the league, he's just 25 years old. And the expectation, at least in this moment right now, is the Giants spent a 7th rounder to take a flyer, a 1-season flyer on the guy. If it doesn't pan out and 3 weeks into the season, they cut ties with him, if the money was all equal and they could get rid of it, that'd be fine too. Like for a 7th round pick, I'm fine. I don't think that's going to be the case. I think this guy is going to have every opportunity over the course of this year to carve out a unique role for the Giants in the way that Wink Martindale wants to have that versatility defensively. But he's a player who, going back to 2020, he played in 16 when there was 16 games, and then all 17 games the next 2 seasons. Started 7, all 17, and then 13 games going back to this past season. He is a 37-game starter, 50 career games under his belt, and he's a guy that has 105 and 99 combined tackles over the past 2 seasons. So, almost, I can do the hard math, over 200 combined tackles the past 2 seasons. Over 130, almost 140 solo tackles, 13 tackles for a loss in his career, 11 QB hits, right? So, I mean, again, this kid has seen a lot of reps. And if you believe that the Giants coaching staff is one of the biggest reasons that we saw the team success that we saw last season to go along with growth from young players at key positions, but if you think that's chief among it, then you have to look at Isaiah Simmons and say, well, we're going to get more. It's going to be better. It's going to be more consistent than what Arizona was getting there. A quick tick back over into the conversation here, just so we go ahead and get you guys involved. He could be a replacement for Tay Crowder. And that's another good example, Ian, when we go back to last season. Think about the guys that played inside of the Giants defense that have either caught on somewhere else as a depth piece, are still looking for their next opportunity, right? Whatever Isaiah Simmons is or is not, he was a consistent on-the-field player. So you do want to see him get back to some version of where that hype was when he was taken 8th overall. But all of the natural raw talents are there. Tay Crowder, I mean, Jalen Smith also was a guy that had some expectations and didn't live up to. But Tay Crowder being a later round pick or an undrafted pick, I always mixed up the two, Mr. Irrelevant versus unsigned. Those guys, they still carved out a role, and they don't have nearly the measurables that Isaiah Simmons comes in the door with here. We'll throw this one up here. Arizona let Hopkins go for free. Burn it down. Yeah, I mean, listen, just as as a more than a yard sale, right, Sci Guy? It's this is well, it is some version of burn it down, right? This is an organization that is just they needed to reset, right? And by the way, we'll get into Ron's next comment there as well. This is the thing that the Giants avoided, coming out of the Dave Gettleman era and coming out of the bad coaching era and cycling through these guys. There was a world where you would say, okay, let's move on from every big player we have here. And you can even set aside this offseason with Saquon Barkley, right? But you're looking at it and you could be saying, well, now that means, Saquon Barkley, let's go ahead and trade him and get draft pick value back. And we talked about these possibilities, right? Daniel Jones, don't really know where the trade value would have been, but giving him the new contract, getting that place off this past season, guys like Xavier McKinney, guys like Azeez Ojulari, guys like Dexter Lawrence, guys like Leonard Williams, right? All of those names, depending on how last season went and Brian Dable's first year as the head coach and Joe Schoen's first year as the GM, the Giants could have been talking about a very similar thing, right? We know how atrocious this team has been on the field for seasons leading up to that moment when Brian Dable and Joe Schoen came in together. If not for that, we might be talking about that version, because at some point you do need to make the hard decision. Do I think it's smart that they gave away, for nothing for Hopkins? Probably not. But at some point, it's just about clearing off the cap, resetting this thing back down to its baseline and building back up. So, not that we need to talk about the Arizona Cardinals at length here. Let's get in on Ron also as well. I envision him more as a weapon to negate tight ends. Yeah. And we're going to face a lot of good tight ends in our schedule. Yes. And that is, again, that I said there at the top leading into this conversation, that to me is a big representation of what he can be. Again, what is the success rate going to be? We'll see, right? Because the coverage numbers have been a mixed bag for him. He still has a lot of development to do. But if you go back and think about, and we can even say, when we look at the Giants' schedule, right? Because we're mentioning all of the tight ends that they're going to face here. By the way, they face the Arizona Cardinals September 17th. How about that? In Arizona. So Simmons will get a very early opportunity to make a statement, but you're going to get Kittles there in San Francisco. You're going to get across this roster here. Who else are they going to have to take on? Really quality tight ends. It's actually interesting because if you go and you think about a team, even like Dallas, when you look at their tight end room, they're now going to be running with a Ferguson, a Shoemaker. That's the rookie that they brought in there as well. Different degrees of what the athleticism, quality of tight end, yes, but then quality of athletic tight end. And that's where I think you like it a little bit more. You also like the simple fact that you're going to get a player in Isaiah Simmons who is standing in at 6'4", 238. There's been times, and not even with Giants, just in general, picture the bigger tight ends, picture the Darren Wallers of the world. There are times when you can be draped on the tight end doing your job, but the size is just what impairs you, right? The size is what prevents you from making the play because you high point it and he's catching that thing somewhere in the 7.72 range while you're there battling at 5'10", 5'11". And if you go back and think about the Giants right now and different guys that could line up against tight ends, again, staying out of the linebacker room because even Bobby Okereke, for as excited as we are for him, we don't want to have to pit him against the tight end. And I don't sit here in this moment right now. Micah McFadden's not that guy either. And Darian Beavers, we don't even know yet any confirmation on it. So think about Adoree Jackson, right, in his new role. Not the biggest cornerback in the world, though. Go into the safety room and think about Xavier McKinney, 6', 201. So you're just talking about getting more height, more size. And the speed factor is the biggest thing. Will there be lumps that he'll take in coverage? Of course. Will there be pass interference penalties? Sure. But the fact that he runs a sub 4.40 means that you can at least rely on him to be in the area. And that can take a 7-yard pass and shut it down and make it a second down versus losing that man off the line, losing that man 7 to 10 yards, having it become 15, 20-yard chunk plays, having the safeties have to come down and protect against that as well. So I don't know. The biggest thing that I can say here is I don't know wholly how the Giants and Wink Martindale are going to use him. I'm not going to overhype as he's going to be the stopper of this, the tight ends. He's going to be a supplemental pass rusher getting after the quarterback. Bottom line is, though, he is an athletic, versatile weapon that in the hands of quality coaching, I think we're going to see the best version of Isaiah Simmons that we've probably seen in his pro career. Okay, quick look over here at Sagai before we touch back in on the cut. That the question that came in there as well. I don't want Simmons guarding speed wide receivers or running backs. He should be able to stick with all but the best tight ends in the NFL. Yeah, and so let's extend it a little bit more here, right? Do I want him picking up running backs out of the backfield? Not ideally, but there probably will be times if he's on the field that's going to happen. Do I want him in coverage against, as you say, speedy wide receivers? No. But there's going to be plus matchups depending on a week-to-week basis where you feel like the size and speed combination should make it possible for him to stick with matchup number X, right? Fourth wide receiver on the field, tight end that is not in the Darren Waller model, is going to give you an opportunity for him to have some success and be used over a couple of different spots. Backing it up here, who cut down that we added to the room with this edition? Yeah, so we did this the last 2 episodes talking about who's getting cut down. And when we did our list, actually, I do have the scrap piece of paper here. On the offensive side, including Gano at the kicker spot, I had gotten to 24 currently on the offensive side of the ball. And then on the defensive side of the ball, and by the way, guys, I had going to practice squad like DeVito, Corbin, if they're going to keep Matt Breida, Pimpleton, Colin Johnson, depending on what happens here. I right now have special teamer Bryce Ford Wheaton going through. McCathan was an interesting one. I put him on the practice squad vein just because the injuries and getting acclimated. It's hard to tell that they're going to keep him on the active roster. Those are a couple of guys there just in terms of practice squad numbers. Defensively, same thing. Came up to 24 and still felt like there was room to add guys in here. So I don't necessarily like bubble guys that we had talked about. We thought Cam Johnson would be out, but Deontay Johnson was another guy that we talked about the potential of, is he going to be in that room, right? And the other thing we have to talk about here too, both sides of the ball. So you had 48 total, but then you need to add in the long snapper and maybe, so you're going to have Kreider in there as the long snapper that got you to 49. So you're living with 4 more roster spots by our count. Maybe one more of those goes to offensive line. You're up at 50. Maybe you keep one of these linebackers. Now you're up to 51. And you could even look inside the secondary and say, is there an extra guy that sticks around? I mentioned earlier, a Gervarius Owens. Is he more labeled for practice squad or does he hang on here? Maybe he's a guy that gets a bump. Deontay Johnson, again, I'm in between on where he lands. And then even if you go inside on the defensive side, talking about after Jordan Riley, who's shown out here in the first 2 preseason games, you've got Baldonado, right? He's in there. You've got guys like Kobe Smith, Brandon Bryant, these kind of guys that we pushed away from. We have DJ Davidson as a bubble guy right now with his performances and his injury concerns. So I don't know. I don't know if anyone of substance in this moment with this addition gets bumped. And that's actually kind of the beauty of it and why you want Joe Schoen to be active here even ahead of the cut down day coming at the beginning of next week, because they have spots. I mean, generally speaking, there are plenty of guys that you can list when you look over the roster and say, yeah, practice squad or cut without any real level of angst around it, right? And I think this, even you want to go back to the offense just briefly here. When I talked about the wide receiver room, I had listed it as Hodgins, Hyatt, Campbell, Slayton, Robinson, barring whether or not maybe he starts on the PUP list, but he's been out there and working, Shep, and then my 7th was Ford Wheaton. Now, some people say Cole Beasley has earned that spot. I think you move on from him because he's a veteran camp guy that just in case. I think you move on from a Crowder because, again, veteran guy just in case. Then you get into the Colin Johnsons of the world, and that's where maybe some of these decisions get made about a roster spot that needs to get occupied. Let's keep it going on some other things we see here as Isaiah Hodgins, as we always like to just reset the conversation. New York Football Giants Joe Schoen sending a 7th round pick to the Arizona Cardinals in exchange for Isaiah Simmons, former top 10, 8th overall 2020 draft pick, a player that was locked in for a $12.7 million 5th-year option that the Arizona Cardinals elected not to pick up. And that, of course, opened the door for a franchise that now it is all but becoming official, is going to be resetting themselves in a significant way here as they move forward. Todd came in here with, thing is, it's the kind of player we need. And this is to the point, right? Let's not set an expectation bar for him short of saying he's the mold of player that the Giants need. That's the best thing about this. He fits the mold of a player that the Giants Remember, he's drafted 8th overall, right? Guys like this are not available later in the first round, not available in second and third rounds necessarily. Or maybe we retroactively look back and say, this is a guy that has all the athleticism and is a raw athlete, but needs to be refined. And maybe if he had gone to a team, mid second round or third round, then you would have just had this guy developing in the background behind another player, as opposed to, again, not a knock on Arizona, but going to an organization that didn't necessarily have the most well-run system, that maybe misidentified the idea of plugging him into one position, having that fail, and then constantly trying to rework so that you still find value out of this player, right? Everything could have gone better for Isaiah Simmons had he gone to a different team. I can list half a dozen teams around the NFL that he would have been better suited to go to based on coaching staff, based on scheme. Isaiah Simmons on the Baltimore Ravens. I don't know what he is now, right? I don't know where the 5th-year option status stands with him. And that would have been, by the way, under Wink Martindale for those last 2 seasons before Wink Martindale obviously parted and joined the Giants, right? Like, I don't know. And that's why coaching matters so much here. Saigai has a news flash. Wink heard about trade and sprinted down the hall to give Joe Schoen another big bear hug. Yeah, again, it all points to Wink Martindale getting a very versatile weapon that he's going to love supplementing everything that he wants to do. Note here, just as some people just chiming in on, Owens won't last on practice squad. Someone will snatch him up. Yeah, and again, so that's why we talk about this when we do our 53 man. It's also about the idea. So when I went back and said, well, DeVito, Pimpleton, maybe Colin Johnson will be a candidate for someone to take a look at as well. He's had the injuries, but he certainly showed out when he had the opportunities and was healthy last season. Those are guys that I think, though, can make it through and then can be on that roster, right? David Sills is another guy that gets thrown out there, gets a year older, follows Daniel Jones around like a puppy dog, always seems destined for the practice squad. But those are guys that you feel comfortable going there because you don't think they're going to get snatched up by someone else. Owens might. He might have shown enough in this camp that another team takes a flyer on him. And that's really what makes the start of next week so fascinating, because it is going to be a flurry. You're going to see 35 plus guys getting cut from teams, and then you're going to see teams saying, okay, who can I add in here, right? What is another little ingredient? And that's where, from a Giants perspective, it's going to be fascinating to see when we talk about 48 guys, right? 48 guys, and what happens on the offensive line. Does Phillips stick around? In this moment, I said you have to put Pert through because that's what you're seeing right now. You're seeing he's getting the reps. So if you're going to occupy with 7 guys, he's going to be a part of it. Now, as cuts happen here, the Giants may just swap out immediately and say, hey, I got veteran X, makes a lot more sense. And you're going to see a lot of potential movement here, not just for the New York Football Giants, but for everybody. So the Giants, man, make what feels like a pretty damn exciting move here, and a move that should, for a defensive unit, just to reiterate, that has depth concerns in the secondary, that has some depth questions in the linebacking room, that has depth, certainly availability when it comes to the edge rushers, although I at least feel good about Ximenez, and we feel good about having Ward inside of that group as well. There's guys that are familiar, obviously, and getting into their second year. Some have carried over with Wink Martindale from previous stops. Others are in the second year with the Giants. But there is a depth concern, right? And even all the way back to safety, right? If we're being fully transparent, Andy and I are high on a player like Dane Belton, but he needs to take those progressive steps forward. And by the way, the things we've seen from Dane Belton in camp are, this guy's a bit of a ball hawker, right? Let him have a head of steam. Let him pop into those bunches and strip and grab at that ball, right? Lay some big hits. Okay, good. But let's not start elevating where this guy needs to be out there for 60% of the reps or something, right? And I think that's something I'm guilty of, is you start to get excited about a player and you over elevate what they should be doing or how much they should be on the field. We really just need to have specialized moments from a lot of guys. Dane Belton can be that inside of the safety room. Isaiah Simmons can be that guy. He can give you a couple of special moments throughout the course of a game. And let's go back to something that Joe Schoen talked about when he was interviewed at Giants training camp about 2 weeks ago. He said last year we were so hamstrung fiscally that it was impossible for us looking at the roster and saying, we need better defensive line depth. We do not have the ability to go out there and address it. We want to. We know we need to. We can't go do it. Now, this year, you have Robinson. Now, this year, even though it's a draft pick, you also bring in a guy like Jordan Riley, right? They brought in Nunez Roche to help define that depth group and feel like you were stronger there coming into the season. So you improve those areas. That's what this is: improving depth across this defensive side of the ball, because they're still going to have questions. But the best thing you can give for Wink Martindale is weapons, and he'll mix and match, and guys will be on the field for some downs and off for others. And ultimately, what you're going to ask is for everybody defensively, Isaiah Simmons now included, is to be alert, to be ready, to know your assignments and know where you need to be on the field, because the quick changes that you could see down to down on the defensive side of the ball are going to be big, and they're going to need to happen quickly and smartly, and without having too many on the field, and without having to take a timeout to avoid having penalties, right? Those things are going to need to happen in a regimented fashion, because this year, unlike last year, they were able to add in a few more weapons. So now you want to be able to rotate them a little bit more successfully. Again, man, thank you to everybody that came in for this one. We're going to wrap it up here, I think, in the next couple of minutes. Reiterating, if you didn't join us at the top, it's also iterated right out here. Giants send a 7th-round pick to the Arizona Cardinals in exchange for former top 10 pick Isaiah Simmons, adding him to the defensive unit and adding him to what we think will be a potential tight end matchup defensively on those passing downs. Somebody that I think can support in the run defense when he's on the field, because he's 6'4", because he's 240. I want to make sure, I want to confirm that as well, because that was him coming out of college, and I did not check in on, just in case, has he slimmed down at all since? Still listed at 6'4", 238. So nothing's changed in terms of the measurables there. If the speed is still there, the quickness, the burst, right, can lay some good hits, then you have to have some optimism around what this guy is going to be capable of. And at 24, going to be 25 years old, the last note that I'll make before we wrap this up here. Well, how about this for a little something here? Snap counts. Let's wrap it up on two fronts. First, the snap counts. So defensively, he played 34% of the snaps his rookie year, played 92% of the snaps his second year, and 81 in his final year. Now, interestingly enough, though, he did play 25%, reducing year over year, 25, 18, and then 0 special team snaps this last season with Arizona. But he did play on special teams. He does have speed. So there's also that world when we talk about the bubble guys and what the role is going to be. I think if you're the Giants on this 1 year showcase for Simmons, hey, we're going to use you everywhere. Show us that you can have value, and we're going to get you on the field to be productive for us. So you have to love this news. You have to be excited about it ahead of preseason game, final preseason game tomorrow. I guess the fascinating thing is, and I'll look this up, whether or not he'll get on the field for that preseason game, because now the final preseason game takes on another level of excitement if he can get out there on the field and give us a little bit of a taste of what he could look like for the New York Football Giants, and maybe just get a little taste of Wink Martindale's system, right? Because now we are down to it's this game and then the Dallas Cowboys. So fascinating to see how he fits into this scheme, how he'll be utilized, and ultimately how the New York Football Giants continue to improve over the course of it. My one other note that I was going to make there, which I was just going to check in on, but I think I probably lost it. I lost it when I went to snap count. So just one more thought there around how he can be used, how he can maximize himself. And as Cy Guy Rice says, great Thursday news. Thanks. Will we see him play on Saturday? Oh, it's Saturday. Is that Saturday night? I thought that was is it Saturday night? I thought it was Friday night again. Saturday gives him a better chance then. If it was going to be Friday night, then I would have felt a little bit different about it, just because you're talking, just because you're talking about gets traded today, when is he going to arrive, all that good stuff, right? But if the Giants, it is Saturday, you're right, Saturday night special, 6 p.m. Yeah. I would say you'd like to see him out there. Traded on a Thursday, time to travel, hopefully gets to New York today or early tomorrow, gets in the building, gets a sense of things, meets with Wink Martindale, meets some teammates, gets into a film room. Maybe you just get him out there just to let him run around and get a sense of some of the rhythm, play calling, right, communications assignments, etc. So would like to see that, certainly. And obviously Blitz Simmons is a nightmare, especially with the front four being dangerous. And again, we're going to talk about this at length. Andy, you'll get back on here with me. But that's again, the coverage is great. Or the idea of how you want to use them against tight ends. I think that the size and the speed and the strength, it supplements a Kayvon Thibodeau, it supplements an Azeez Ojulari and O'Shea Ximenez, guys, when you want to send blitzes out of the secondary package when you're running the nickel package. Well, now Simmons is a different beast, right? It's not bringing Cordell Flott off the edge to come down on a blitz because he's lengthy and doesn't have the size and mass. Now it's Isaiah Simmons. And that lays some hurt in a different way. And that makes offenses have to think about how they're going to set up their protections differently too, right? A running back trying to pick up a blitzing Cordell Flott is different than trying to pick up a blitzing Isaiah Simmons. So all these little wrinkles make it really exciting for the New York Football Giants, for Wink Martindale, for the defense, for us, gosh darn it, for the fans as well. So that being the case, we have just a couple show notes here. So like I said, you can go back and check. We did our offensive and defensive 53-man roster. For the most part, nothing's going to change dramatically with the addition of Isaiah Simmons. But we have a couple of bonus things, which were Ryan Dunleavy. He listed his bubble guys as we head towards this weekend. Did a little segment on him. Then we also had some fun talking about Chris Collinsworth, who spoke about Eli Manning, once upon a time, spoke about Daniel Jones and comparing him to Patrick Mahomes. That was a fun one, too. So we did a couple little 5-minute bonuses that we'll probably hold off here a little bit, and then you'll see them throughout the day today. And we'll try to come in maybe on Friday just to, again, reiterate some news and notes. Sure, we're going to get some comments from Joe Schoen, from Brian Dable, from Wink Martindale, and maybe some other players as well, veterans on the defensive side of the ball, about the addition of Isaiah Simmons. So we'll break all that down. The way that you make sure you get the alerts is you do what you're doing right now. Follow us on YouTube. Turn on the alerts so you know when we're going live. Get us on your podcast feeds as well. Over on Twitter at One Giant Podcast, at Adam Armbrecht, and at AndyMac214. And please, if you're over on Twitter, give the One Giant Podcast an account a follow. One thing we really want to try to build up is the following over there, so we make sure we're getting our content out to as many people as possible and engaging with everybody as much as possible. So give us a follow wherever you can. Appreciate you no matter where you find us. And until next time, as Andrew Makowitz would need if he were here, demand the people know. As always, let's go Big Blue.